And the Kashalt? Ander asked quickly. What of the trolls? Chios shook his head. Nothing. I took the liberty of dispatching another messenger. Ander nodded his approval. And the dwarves? We're here, a rough voice answered. Some of us, at least. A bearded, thick-set dwarf made his way forward through the men gathered about the council table. Quick blue eyes blinked through a face that was withered and browned by the sun, and a pair of gnarled hands fastened on the table's edge. Druid? The dwarf nodded briefly to Eleanor, then turned to Ander. My name is Brolwork, elder and citizen of Culhaven. I've brought 100 sappers to the service of the Elfstones. You can thank the Druid for that. He found us some weeks ago at work on a bridge crossing the Silver River and warned us of the danger. Elfstones is known to the dwarves, so there were no questions asked. We sent word to Culhaven and came on ahead. 10 days' march, and a hard march at that, but we're here. He extended his hand, and Ander took it warmly. What are the others, Brolwork? Eleanor asked. The dwarf nodded rather impatiently. On their way by now, I presume. You should have an army of several thousand by week's end. He gave Eleanor a disapproving frown. In the meantime, you've got us, Druid. And mighty lucky you are to have us. No one but the sappers could have rigged that ramp. The Elfich, Chios explained quickly to a puzzled Ander. Brolwork and his sappers have been working with us on our defences. In the process of studying the Elfich, he saw that it was possible to rig the 5th ramp to collapse. Child's play, Brolwork dismissed the accomplishment with a wave of his hand. We undercut the stone block, removed the secondary supports, and split the primary with iron wedges fixed to chains. The chains we concealed in the brush beneath the ramp, ran them to the heights, and then lined them to a system of pulleys. If the demons reach the 5th ramp, just draw in the chains, slip the wedges, and the whole ramp from the 5th gate down falls away. Simple. Simple if you have the engineering skills of a dwarf sapper, I think, Ander smiled. Well done, Brolwork. We have need of you. There are others here that you need as well. Eleanor put his hand on Ander's shoulder and pointed to the far end of the council table. The elven prince turned. A lone elf dressed all in leather stepped forward and placed his hand across his heart in the pledge of loyalty. Dane, my lord prince, the elf said quietly. I am a winged rider. A winged rider? Ander stared at the elf in surprise. He heard stories of his father, from his father of the people who call themselves the Sky Elves, stories almost forgotten by most, for no winged rider had come to Arborlon in the last 100 years. How many of you are there? He asked finally. 5, Dane replied. There would be more, but for the fear of a demon attack on the Winged Hove, our own home city, my father has sent those of us who are here. We are all of one family. My father is called Harold. He paused and glanced at Eleanor. There was a time when the Druid and he were friends. We are still friends, Winged Rider, Eleanor said quietly. Dane acknowledged the Druid's commitment with a nod, then returned his gaze to Ander. My father's sense of kinship with the land elves is stronger than that of most of his countrymen. My lord prince, for most have long since broken all ties with the old ways and the old rule, and my father knows that Eleanor stands with the Elfstones, and that has meaning. Thus he sends us. He would be here himself, but for the absence of his rock, Genuine, who trains with my brother's son, so that he may one day be a winged rider, as was his father. Still, those of us who are here may be of some use. We can fly the whole of the westland skies. If need be, we can seek out the demons who threaten and tell you of their movements. We can spy our strengths and weaknesses. That much, at least, we can offer. That much we accept with gratitude, Dane. Andrew returned to the wing rider's salute. Be welcome. Dane bowed and stepped back. Andrew glanced at Chios. Are there any others who come to stand with us, First Minister? Chios shook his head slowly. No, my Lord Prince. These are all. Andrew nodded. Then these will be enough. He motioned for all who were gathered to seat themselves with him at the council table, where the general discussion ensued on such matters as soldier placement, weapons distribution, battle tactics, and the taking of additional defensive measures. Reports were heard from Elron Tay on the elven hunters of the regular army, from Karen on the home guard, and from Kobold of the Black Watch. Browick gave his assessment of the overall structural efficiency of the elven defences, and C. Jans was consulted on strategies that might be implemented to offset the superior strength of the demon hordes. Even Dane spoke briefly on the fighting capabilities of the rocks and their uses in aerial combat. Time slipped past rapidly and the night drifted away. Andrew grew light-headed with fatigue, and his thoughts began to wander. It was in the middle of one of these wanderings that a tremendous crash jerked him upright as the doors of the High Council flew open and a disheveled gale appeared. Flanked by the chamber guards, breathless, the little elf rushed forward and dropped to his knees before Andrew. My lord, he gasped, his face flushed with excitement. My lord, the king is awake. Andrew stared. Awake? Then he was on his feet and sprinting from the chamber. While he slept, it felt to Eventine Lessedell as if he were floating through a blackness layered with gossamer threads that wrapped his body in a seamless blanket. One by one he felt the threads enfold him, mould about him, join with him. Time and space were nothing. There was only the blackness and the weave of the threads. It was a warm, pleasant sensation at first, much like the feel to an infant of a mother's close embrace, filled with comfort and love. But then the embrace seemed to tighten, and he began to suffocate. Desperately he struggled to break free and found that he could not. He began to sink downward through the blackness, spinning slowly, his blanket a shroud, and he no longer a creature of life, but one of death. Terrified, he thrashed within his silken prison, tearing and ripping at its fabric until, with a sudden rending, it flew apart and was gone. His eyes opened. Light blinded him momentarily, harsh and flickering. He blinked in its glare, disorientated and confused, fighting to gain some sense of where he was and what he was doing. Then the outlines of a room began to gather form, and he recognized the smell of oil lamps and the feel of cotton sheets and woolen blankets wrapped close about his body. All that had happened in the moments before he slept came back again in a rush, images that ran, mad and disjointed, across his mind. The break line, Haley's cut, and the demons attacking from out of the deep mist, lines of elven archers, lancers and pikemen spread out below him, cries of pain and death, dark forms hurtling towards him through a wall of blue fire, Alanon, Andrew, and the glint of weapons. Then a sudden blow. He twitched violently beneath the covers, and sweat bathed his body. The room sharpened abruptly before his eyes. It was his sleeping room in the manor house in Arborlon, and there was a figure moving toward him. My lord, Gale's frightened voice sounded in his ear, and the youthful face bent down close to his own. My lord, are you awake? What has happened? He muttered, his own voice thick and barely unrecognizable. You were wounded, my lord. A Haley's cut. A blow struck here. The elf pointed to the king's left temple. You have been unconscious ever since, my lord. We were so worried. How long have I slept? He interrupted. His hand reached to touch his head, and the pain lanced downward through his neck. 7 days, my lord. 7 days? Gael started to back away. I will bring your son, my lord. His mind wheeled. My son? Prince Ander, my lord. His aide dashed toward the sleeping room door. He meets now with the High Council. Lie back and I will bring him at once. Eventide watched him wrench open the door, heard him talk briefly with someone beyond, then watched the door close again, leaving him in silence. He tried to raise himself, but the effort was too much and he fell back weakly. Ander. Had Gale said that Ander was meeting with the High Council? Where was Arion? Doubt clouded his thoughts, and the questions came in a flurry. What was he doing here in Arborlon? What had befallen of the army of the Elves? What had become of their defence of the Sarandanan? Again he tried to raise himself and fell back again. A wave of nausea swept through him. He felt suddenly old, as if the number of his years was a sickness that had wasted him. His jaw tightened. Oh, that he might have back again 5 minutes of his youth to give him strength enough to rise from this bed. Anger and determination fired him, and he inched himself upward against his pillows until he lay propped against them, breathing raggedly. Across the room, Mance raised his grizzled head. The king opened his mouth to call out to the old wolfhound, but suddenly the dog's eyes met his, and the words died in his throat. There was hate in those eyes, hate so cold that it cut through Eventide like winter frost. He blinked in disbelief, fighting the sense of repulsion that welled up within him. Mance, what was he thinking? He forced himself to look away, to stare elsewhere in the sleeping room, at walls and their hangings, at furniture and at drapes drawn tight across the windows. Desperately he tried to compose himself and could not. I am alone, he thought suddenly, unreasonably, and was filled with fear. Alone. Glanced back at Mance. The wolfhound's eyes fixed him now. Veiled now. Hiding what had been so evident before. Or had he imagined it? He watched as the old dog rose, turned about, and lay down again. Why doesn't he not come to me? The king asked himself. Why does he not come? He slipped back against the pillows. What am I saying? The words whispered in his mind, and he saw the madness that threatened to slip across him, seeing hatred in the eyes of an animal that had been faithful to him for years, seeing in Mance an enemy that might do him harm. What was wrong with him? Voices sounded in the outer corridor. Then the sleeping room door opened and closed again. Nanda crossed the room to reach down and hold him close. The king hugged his son to him, then broke the clasp, searching Ander's shadowed face as the prince seated himself on the edge of the bed. Tell me what has happened, Eventide ordered softly. Then he saw something flicker in his son's eyes, and he felt a sudden chill pass through him. He forced the question from the lips. Where is Arion? Ander opened his mouth to speak, then stared at the old man wordlessly. Eventide's face froze. Is he dead? Ander's voice was a whisper. At War Run. He seemed to search for something more to say, then gave up, shaking his head slowly. Eventide's eyes filled with tears, and his hands shook as he grasped his son's arms. Arion is dead. He spoke the words as if they were a lie. Ander nodded, then looked away. Kael Pendannon too. There was a moment of stunned silence. The king's hands fell away. And the Sarandanan? Lost. They stared at each other wordlessly, father and son, as if some frightening secret had been shared that should never have been told. Then Ander reached down and clasped his father to him. For long moments they held each other in silence. When at last the king spoke, his voice was flat and distant. Tell me about Arion. Everything, leave nothing out. Ander told him quietly. He related how his brother had died, how they had brought him out of the break line to the Sarandanan, and how they had buried him at Bayandra. Then he spoke of all that had befallen the army of the Elves from the first day of battle at Haley Cut through the long march back to Arborlon. Eventide listened and said nothing. When Ander had finished, he stared blankly at the flicker of the oil lamp for a moment. Then his eyes shifted to his son. I want you to return to the High Council, Ander. Do what must be done. He paused, his voice breaking. Go on, I will be all right. Enda looked at him uncertainly. I can ask El to come in. The king shook his head. No, not now. I just want to... He stopped, choking back what he was about to say, one hand gripping his son's arm tightly. I am very proud of you, Enda. I know how difficult... Enda nodded, his throat tightening. He placed his father's hands within his own. Gale will be outside in the hall when you need him. He rose and started toward the door. His hand was on the latch when Eventine called out after him, his voice strangely anxious. Take Max out with you. Anders stopped, looked at the old wolfhound, whistled him to his side and let him out. The door closed softly behind him. Alone again, this time truly alone, the king of the elves lay back upon the cushions of his pillows and let the enormity of all that had happened wash over him. In a little more than 7 days, the finest army in the Four Lands had been driven like a herd of cattle before wolves from its own country, driven from the break line, from the Sarandanan, and all the way back home to its home. There to stand or fall. Somewhere deep within him, there was a terrible sense of failure. He had let this happen. He was responsible. Harrion, he whispered, suddenly remembering. Then the tears welled up in his eyes, and he began to cry.